It began with laughter that echoed through the polished boardroom, but within minutes that laughter turned into horrified silence. A billionaire CEO casually smiled at a young woman and joked that she could inherit his entire fortune if she solved his late father's impossible riddle. Everyone chuckled, believing it was another one of his cruel executive games. Then she quietly unfolded a faded piece of paper she had carried for nearly 20 years, whispered a single sentence, and the color drained from the CEO's face. Before anyone could understand what had happened, he collapsed into his chair, trembling, as every certainty he had ever believed about his family's fortune, legacy, and father shattered before his eyes. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing community. Julian Mercer had spent 20 years building Mercer Dynamics into one of the largest engineering companies in North America. Magazine covers praised his brilliance, investors admired his confidence, and competitors feared his relentless ambition. Yet the people who worked closest to him knew another side. Julian had inherited not only his father's business instincts but also his habit of turning every serious conversation into a challenge that left someone humiliated. It was easier for him to laugh than to listen. Easier to compete than to understand. The annual Legacy Innovation Summit had become his favorite event because it allowed him to judge aspiring entrepreneurs in front of investors and executives. Hundreds applied each year, hoping for funding that could transform their dreams into thriving companies. Among the finalists that year was 34-year-old Evelyn Harper, a civil engineer whose tiny nonprofit developed affordable flood-resistant homes for struggling rural communities. Her organization barely survived from grant to grant, but every project saved families from losing everything during seasonal disasters. She wasn't interested in becoming wealthy. She simply wanted enough funding to expand her work. Unlike the polished contestants surrounding her, Evelyn arrived carrying an old leather folder worn soft by years of use. Most assumed it contained engineering drawings. None imagined it held something much more valuable. During the presentations, Julian admired her technical brilliance but criticized her financial projections. He argued that helping poor communities produced too little profit to justify investment. The audience nodded politely while Evelyn accepted every criticism without anger. After the presentations ended, Julian invited the finalists into the executive boardroom where portraits of previous Mercer family leaders watched over every meeting. Dominating the wall behind Julian's chair hung the portrait of his late father, Theodore Mercer, the legendary founder whose mysterious final instructions had puzzled the family for decades. Theodore's last handwritten note had become almost mythical inside the company. It contained only one sentence. The greatest inheritance belongs to the one who remembers where the bridge begins. Lawyers, historians, consultants, professors, and even cryptographers had spent years trying to interpret those words. Nothing ever made sense. The note became little more than a family curiosity. Seeing Evelyn glance thoughtfully at the portrait, Julian laughed and decided to entertain everyone. He jokingly announced that if anyone could finally solve his father's ridiculous riddle, he would gladly hand over every dollar Theodore had intended to leave behind. The executives laughed, the investors laughed, even the assistant smiled nervously. Only Evelyn remained silent. Slowly she reached into her leather folder. Instead of architectural drawings, she removed a faded letter. The room gradually became quiet. She carefully unfolded it. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. She explained that 20 years earlier, when she was only 14, her hometown had suffered catastrophic flooding after an aging bridge collapsed. Hundreds lost homes. Her own parents died while helping trapped neighbors escape rising water. In the weeks after the tragedy, an elderly businessman had quietly visited the devastated town without media cameras or reporters. He spent hours speaking with grieving families instead of politicians. That man had been Theodore Mercer. He had sat beside young Evelyn beneath a temporary relief tent. Before leaving, he handed her a letter and asked her never to forget one sentence. She had kept it every day since. Julian's confident smile slowly disappeared. Evelyn opened the fragile letter. Written in Theodore's unmistakable handwriting were the words, "People think bridges begin with concrete. They don't. Every bridge begins the moment one stranger decides another life is worth carrying." Silence consumed the room. then Evelyn looked toward Theodore's portrait. She quietly finished. The greatest inheritance belongs to the one who remembers where the bridge begins. Julian stopped breathing for several seconds. Those weren't simply similar words, they completed the unfinished sentence. The room suddenly felt impossibly small. Evelyn explained that Theodore had funded the reconstruction anonymously. More importantly, he spent weeks personally helping engineers redesign safer crossings. Before leaving, he told frightened children that money only mattered if it became a bridge between suffering and hope. She never realized those words held importance beyond comforting a grieving teenager. Julian slowly lowered himself into his chair. His hands trembled. Every executive watched in disbelief. For years Julian had searched for hidden bank accounts, secret investments, missing legal documents, and complicated financial codes. The answer had never been about money. It had always been about purpose. Company archives were immediately searched, old storage rooms were opened. Dust-covered journals belonging to Theodore were finally examined from a completely different perspective. Inside one forgotten notebook, investigators found detailed instructions Theodore had left for attorneys. He had established a massive charitable trust decades earlier but intentionally concealed its activation requirements. Only someone who could explain the true meaning behind the riddle, not merely repeat it, would reveal the trust's purpose. The document specified that the trust would fund whoever demonstrated Theodore's lifelong philosophy of building bridges between people instead of fortunes. The trust contained nearly $2 billion. Every lawyer who had interpreted the documents focused on legal complexity. None searched for humanity. Because Evelyn unknowingly carried Theodore's forgotten lesson for 20 years, the trust legally identified her organization as the intended steward. Julian felt every ounce of pride dissolve. His joke had accidentally uncovered the greatest secret in his family's history. Many expected him to challenge the decision, others expected years of lawsuits. Instead, Julian asked to visit the town where Evelyn grew up. That same afternoon they drove together beneath bright summer skies. The rebuilt bridge stood proudly across the river. Children rode bicycles across it, parents pushed strollers, delivery trucks crossed without fear, flowers bloomed along walking paths where floodwater once destroyed everything. An elderly carpenter recognized Theodore's photograph that Julian carried. Tears filled the man's eyes. He remembered the wealthy businessman who spent days hauling lumber with volunteers despite blistered hands. Another resident remembered Theodore refusing television interviews because helping people wasn't meant to become entertainment. Story after story painted a picture Julian had never known. At home Theodore had often seemed distant, demanding, impossible to satisfy. Outside the mansion he quietly became someone entirely different. Julian suddenly understood that he had inherited his father's company but almost none of his father's heart. Over the following weeks newspapers celebrated the astonishing discovery of Theodore's hidden trust. Many expected Evelyn to become another billionaire. Instead she announced every dollar would remain inside the charitable foundation exactly as Theodore intended. Her only condition was that Mercer Dynamics become an active engineering partner instead of merely writing checks. Julian accepted immediately. For the first time in company history, executive bonuses became partially tied to measurable community impact alongside financial performance. Engineers began volunteering in disaster-prone regions. Young interns received scholarships if they committed to infrastructure projects benefiting underserved communities. Retired employees returned as mentors. The culture slowly transformed. Shareholders initially feared reduced profits. The opposite happened. Customers trusted a company that genuinely served people. Talented graduates wanted careers with purpose. Innovation flourished because employees believed their work mattered beyond quarterly reports. Months later Julian returned alone to the bridge. He carried Theodore's old notebook and Evelyn's faded letter. Standing beside flowing water, he realized success had never been about standing above everyone else. It meant becoming strong enough to carry others safely across their hardest seasons. He thought about the joke that had nearly remained just another moment of executive arrogance. Instead it became the doorway to truth, not because one woman solved a clever riddle, because she had quietly lived its answer long before anyone asked the question. The greatest inheritance Theodore left behind was never hidden inside vaults or investment accounts. It lived inside every person willing to choose compassion over pride, service over recognition, and hope over fear. Before we reach the end of this journey, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think is the greatest inheritance a parent can leave behind? Wealth, wisdom, kindness, or something else entirely? Leave your answer in the comments because your perspective may inspire someone who reads it. Years later, the foundation had built hundreds of resilient bridges, schools, community centers, and emergency shelters across regions that had once been forgotten. Families who had never heard the Mercer name before now associated it with hope instead of wealth. Julian often refused awards, insisting they belonged to volunteers, engineers, teachers, and ordinary citizens who chose to help strangers. Evelyn continued living in the same modest home, smiling whenever people called her fortunate, because she knew the real miracle had happened long before billions entered the picture. It began on a difficult afternoon when a grieving girl met an elderly man who believed every human life was worth carrying across the deepest waters. That simple lesson traveled through 2 decades, survived heartbreak, outlived its teacher, transformed an empire, humbled a CEO, and reminded thousands that the strongest bridges are always built first inside the human heart. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May we all remember that the richest inheritance we can leave behind is not what we own, but the lives we live with kindness, forgiveness, hope, and love.